I'm wondering if you saw today's big New Yorker article titled "Joe Biden's Last Campaign" by Evan Osnos. Gives a fairly stark look inside the Biden White House and has as they're gearing up for November. And basically, the tenor of people close to Biden and around him is that the polls are wrong and they're cool as a cucumber. They couldn't feel better about their chances going into November. I'm just wondering if you read that article and any reactions to it.
Yeah, I did. I mean, I for the last several months, I've sort of gotten glimpses here and there of like, maybe this is just a deep bubble that the administration is in. Maybe they're not listening to people outside the White House. Maybe they're all kind of deluded on some level about the reality of the race as it stands right now. And the piece seems to be proof of that. It paints a picture of a totally enclosed world where there's one paragraph that I posted about that kind of captures it all. Biden's chief of staff was talking to Osnos about the extent to which Biden actually receives criticism from outside voices. And he was like, yeah, totally. Biden listens to all kinds of people who criticize him. For instance, he just got off the phone with Larry Summers recently. And when he's not talking to Larry Summers, he's talking to Tom Frieden. He's talking to Mitch McConnell. So he's getting this wide range of like dissenting opinion. So that in of itself, I think, indicates how enclosed things are. And it's not out yet, but I recently wrote a review of Frank Foer's book on Biden that should be out in the nation soon, The Last Politician, which is a kind of behind the scenes look at the first 2 years of Biden's administration. And the picture that book paints and the picture that's painted in this piece are different in the sense that you really don't get an impression that Biden is engaging with progressives or the progressive wing of the party anymore at all. Ron Klain was kind of the liaison between Democratic Party progressives and the administration. He's now no longer chief of staff. And so if it's the case that the people he's really leading on now and looking to him for advice are kind of centrists or even Republicans, that could explain a lot of things about how the last 6 to 8 months have gone. And also this polling question, virtually every poll since the beginning of the year has shown Trump a few points ahead. There's the New York Times Siena poll from just a couple of days ago that said Trump is ahead by 4 or 5 points. Biden is now dead even with Trump with women. He's lost a couple dozen points with non-white voters of color. It's painting a very stark picture, and it's a picture that's not just in that poll. You have a problem with the methodology. People have been trying to pick it apart. You see those kinds of patterns replicating across a lot of polls, both nationally and in the States. And there's no indication in the Osnos piece that the administration is taking any of this seriously. He quotes a bunch of people saying, well, all the polls are kind of wrong. The polling industry doesn't know what it's doing anymore. Nobody picks up their phone. Nobody uses landlines.
Skews elderly because of landlines.
Right, exactly.
Like, I buy that.
Well, yeah, the thing is, like, it's definitely true that the business of polling has gotten a lot harder over the last decade or so, partially because people don't pick up landline phones anymore, sure. But pollsters have done a lot to try to adjust for that. It's not the case that most polls are only landline-based anymore. There's a mix of online stuff and cell phone stuff. So they're trying. And also, if you look at the last several elections, David Ferris did this for Slate last week or maybe a week and a half ago. If you look at polls at this point in the year, in February, March, of the last several presidential elections, each of them, with the exception of 2004, has ultimately indicated who the winner in November was going to be. They were off by a couple of points. To the extent that they're off, they've actually understated the amount of support the Republican candidate has. So it's not the case that polls say nothing about where the election is. It is still March. There's still time for things to happen. But to dismiss everything out of hand and then to say, as they have, like, well, actually, you should look at special elections results because those are more indicative. Or you should look at primary results. Those are more indicative. None of that is true. The best picture you're going to get, as imperfect as it is the polling that's happening right now. And the polling is not good. None of it is good.
Yeah.
But there's nothing in the Osnos piece that suggests that they take what they're saying seriously.
Yeah, the arguments with the polls at this point are weird to me because, they always bring up that, erroneously, that it's only old people that are still answering their landlines, which in that case, they should skew a lot better for Biden. Biden's biggest problems are not with the oldest voters. But, I mean, they'll bring up 2022 a lot, which, was the midterms were certainly a surprise for some people. But the polling companies weren't for the most part, off about the midterms. I mean, Rasmussen and places like that were, but that was a case of just columnists being wrong, not the polling companies.
Also important to remember, like, Democrats did lose the House in 2022. Like, they lost it by much less than people expected. But it was directionally correct to say Republicans were likely to take the House. And that's in an environment, again, the difference between the midterms and the general election is that the midterms bring people out who love to vote. People who love going out there and getting their stickers and whatever.
They love waiting online.
Exactly.
Signing things.
Democrats in recent elections, both in midterms and special elections, have done actually kind of well on that basis. General elections, it's just, the general pool of everybody, people who only vote in presidential elections, people who are less frequent voters. And that's where you'd expect Democrats to see trouble. It's going to be a different electorate.
I just another pull quote here from the New Yorker piece. This is we're speaking of Biden advisor Mike Donilon, and it said Donilon's mild demeanor can be misleading. Like Biden, he has firm beliefs about politics, the public, the press, and a contrarian side. In 2020, he and his campaign team had to decide whether to emphasize the economy or the more abstract idea that Trump imperiled the essence of America. We bet on the latter, Donilon said, even though our own pollsters told us that talking about the soul of the nation was nutty. That experience fortified his belief that this year's campaign should center on what he calls the freedom agenda. By November, he predicted the focus will become overwhelmingly on democracy. I think the biggest images in people's minds are going to be of January 6th. And I just talk about people who have checked out. If they think that like November 2024, the biggest images in people's minds will be of January 6th, and not, let's just say, October 7th and everything that happened after that. And then God only knows what new images will be created from now until November. But like, once again, coming back to this idea that it's the Democrats, like it is not about just voting. This is about saving American democracy. And no, you don't have a choice to vote for anyone else.
Yeah, I mean, the image that's going to be most burned into Americans' minds, most voters' minds, is their last paycheck. I think that's how it tends to work in election. The flight to abstraction, I really don't have very much faith in. I mean, their interpretation of the midterms was that the democracy message worked, that people came out against Trump. I think there might have been some truth to that, again, because the electorate is fundamentally different with midterms. But here, I think that people are still angry about prices. I think people are still angry about interest rates. Their material problems that people are having that the administration needs to speak to. Biden has not put forward anything resembling a second-term agenda at all. Maybe he does that this week with the State of the Union, but it's my job to sort of know what the administration wants to do, what Biden wants to do, what legislation they want to put forward if they get reelected. None of that work, none of that argument has really happened yet. And so to bank everything on January 6th is going to be ancient history, I think, most voters, instead of thinking actively about what can we do materially to demonstrate that we care about the material problems people say that they're facing, say that we care about this foreign policy crisis that we are fomenting and actually exacerbating. I think is kind of delusional. I think that one of the most significant things Biden could do to sort of demonstrate that he is with it and on top of things and capable of exercising leadership would be to shut down the war in Gaza. I think even people who are not necessarily considering themselves, advocates for Palestine in the electorate, do kind of look at that situation and say, Biden is ineffectual. This is a foreign policy situation the United States does not have a handle on. Why is it happening? Why isn't Biden actually bringing things to a close or a settlement? That more than anything else, I think would be a turning point. But there's no indication in that Osino's piece or anything else that he's actively willing to do that or consider that.
Well, the indication came that they're, at least worried about the branding came yesterday when Kamala Harris came out and called for, quote, an immediate ceasefire in Gaza.
Right. And given the immense scale of suffering in Gaza, there must be an immediate ceasefire. For at least the next 6 weeks, which is what is currently on the table.
Saying that Hamas should agree to this is from the New York Times, saying Hamas should agree to a 6-week pause currently on the table and that Israel should increase the flow of humanitarian aid into the besieged enclave amid an ongoing crisis. Ms. Harris's remarks delivered in Selma, Alabama, bolstered a recent push by President Joe Biden for an agreement, and came a day before she was to meet with a top Israeli official involved in war planning, Benny Gantz. Her tone echoed a sharper and more urgent tone coming from the White House, and its frustration with Israel grows. Last month, the president called Israel's response to October 7th over the top. But I mean, I think it's there in the language here. It's just like they've adopted a more aggressive tone, and I think really what this is that they're just sort of rebranding their humanitarian pause as a ceasefire now.
That does seem to be substantively what's happened. I mean, the position that Harris described in that speech is not different from the position that the Biden administration was describing last month. They used the word pause more often than now. They've been pressured into using the word ceasefire. Of course, what people want isn't for them to use the word ceasefire; it's to actually make a ceasefire happen. And the leverage that the United States does have over Israel ought to be used in order to bring that about, instead of sort of waiting for conditions to just sort of settle on a ceasefire kind of magically. I don't know. The South's position has not changed, but I don't know. If people want to see optimism in the fact that they're now using the word ceasefire instead of truce or pause, I guess they can. But materially, nothing the administration is doing is actually shifted.
Well, I mean, yeah, I guess they're doing airdrops now, but I
right.
don't need to spend too much time.
Sorry.
Yeah, I don't need to spend too much time talking about what that represents. But Osita, Biden has not really put forward a platform or an agenda for what his second term in office would be seeking to accomplish, other than preventing Trump from ending democracy. But now, like when you say that, there's been no real engagement with any material concerns or politics, I think people will, partisans of the Democratic Party or supporters of Joe Biden will say things like, well, were you just asleep during the infrastructure bill, the climate bill, the student loan debt forgiveness? I mean, things like that. They're like, those are material concerns. Like, why aren't you happy? What would you say? Like, why aren't those sort of agenda items, why aren't those connecting up to people's lived experience? Or is this the media, or is this the nature of the bills itself?
I mean, I think it's the nature of the bills themselves. I mean, whatever you think about the infrastructure bill, I mean, infrastructure is a kind of long-term infrastructure is a long-term project. People aren't going to see in their own day-to-day lives, in their paychecks, at their jobs necessarily. I mean, it's creating jobs in certain places, creating jobs in Michigan. But for the bulk of Americans, they're not going to see the immediate benefits of some of that stuff before the election, certainly, and maybe not for a few years. I mean, people, I think, want a president who seems attentive to the fact that when they go to the grocery store, rightly or wrongly, they say to themselves, well, look, milk has gone up by this much, bread has gone up by this much. It is harder for me to pay my immediate bills right now. Expiration of pandemic relief programs did not help on this question, right? So people want the president and Democrats to put forward an agenda, not just, doing the kind of structural things and making the kind of structural investments, industrial investments that they've been making over the past couple of years. They want to see immediate, paycheck to paycheck, month to month change in their financial conditions. Stuff like was kind of discussed when people were talking about the more expansive version of Build Back Better. You had things like childcare on the table. You had all kinds of social welfare in the conversation that was sort of stripped out as a matter of congressional politics. If I were instructing Biden, advising Biden, if I were granted 15 seconds between Mitch McConnell and Tom Friedman to recommend him something, I would say, look, talk about that stuff again, or sort of put forward another social welfare agenda that you want to say Democrats will accomplish in the next term. And I think there's going to be a reluctance to do that for a lot of reasons, partially because all that will ultimately falter on whether Democrats hold Congress in the first place, yes, but also this filibuster question, which was not resolved. Biden did not really end up, advocating for filibuster reform for more than just the Democratic reform agenda, the For the People Act, and that kind of stuff. So, I guess there's a reluctance to promise things that Democrats kind of feel aren't going to get passed. I don't know. That's a hole that they've created for themselves. But if I were advising the campaign, two big things would be: one, end the war in Gaza now, and two, put forward an actual economic agenda that is not just about moving the big piece of the economy or making big investments, as important as that might be. It's about delivering immediate relief to people who say that their immediate financial situations aren't what they'd like them to be. And not just talking up too, like the idea that, well, on the basis of all these metrics, the economy is booming right now. Might that be true as a matter of looking at, different statistics? Yes, but the voters are telling you over and over and over again, they aren't feeling that reality. And, I don't think it's smart politics to tell them that they're just deluded, that this isn't real. Trump is not going to say that this is deluded. He's going to say that, yeah, you're absolutely right. Things suck right now, and I'm going to go ahead and fix them. And this guy telling you that you're not suffering is a jackass. I don't know. I feel like that will probably win that argument.
Well, I see. The seeing as how they're probably not going to end the war in Gaza or tell people that their concerns are valid, we're stuck with like a candidate who's trailing Trump in the polls. Probably like 60% of his own voters think he's too old to be president or to be an effective president. And then like the question comes up again: can the Democratic Party replace him? And then the answer is always, who are they going to replace him with? And the one I've seen recently calls into question the most recent example of Lyndon Johnson not seeking a second term because of the Vietnam War. And they're saying the point they made, the people defenders of Biden will make, is that Hubert Humphrey lost to Richard Nixon. Do you see any problems with that, at least in terms of the idea of like why it's impossible to replace Biden at this point?
I mean, the more relevant thing would be, like, if you look at the polling that people have done for Gretchen Whitmer or Gavin Newsom or Kamala Harris or any of the people who seem like they would be the most likely replacements, they don't necessarily do better than Biden right now. But I think that's functionally a matter of name recognition. Like, if you had an actual campaign and these people were out in front of voters, my sense is that the support that they have right now might be a floor and they had room to grow, maybe. It doesn't seem to me like people are going to get more comfortable with Biden's age as we get closer to the election. It doesn't seem like they're going to get more comfortable with his capacity to lead on that score as we get closer to the election. So, maybe in that sense, it would make some strategic sense to think about moving to another candidate. I think the real question is how. Ezra Klein put out this idea maybe like a week and a half ago about doing a brokered convention, just sort of deciding it at the DNC. That could get messy. I don't know. It would be hard for them to do worse than they're doing right now. That's the bottom line for me. So in that sense, they should feel free to experiment or, throw someone else out there. I think it would be hard for them to be in a worse position than Biden is right now. So maybe they might as well, on that basis, consider somebody else. But the reality is that, given what we see in that Osnos piece and what we've seen elsewhere, the administration is so insulated from taking the polls seriously, from voter sentiment, that it doesn't seem likely that we're actually going to see a replacement happen. There's somebody who is quoted on this question, I think in the New York Times recently, who's literally said the word "shut up." This question, shut up. Literally said, "Shut up." Like this is not a real concern. Biden's with it. He's not. He doesn't have dementia. He's gonna inspire confidence as people see him get out there. So shut up and don't talk about this anymore, because he's the guy. So, if that's the attitude, then I don't even know how much sense it makes to speculate about a replacement. It doesn't seem like it's going to happen, absent some kind of medical emergency, which is also plausible given Biden's age, I have to say. That's one thing I've thought about too, actually. I mean, image matters a lot. If Biden were to fall down or something, or wind up with like a little bandage on his head, not even be seriously injured in any way, but just sort of have some kind of mishap that reminds people, damn, this is a really old guy. That could be it. That could be the election. I mean, we remember when Bernie Sanders had the bandage right during the primary last day, a heart attack, whatever. Yeah, it was all this sort of well, look at how he looks. He looks kind of haggard. He looks kind of, I don't know if he still got it. If something like
Biden's
that
never fallen down before, so let's just hope he maintains that until November.
Right. Yeah, I don't know. I just think that could end up mattering, and it really, I don't know. It's hard to say.
I don't know. I just think the 1968 example is interesting because, in that election, the guy who would have beat Nixon was literally assassinated. And Hubert Humphrey was very close in the popular vote in that election. And also, Lyndon Johnson would have lost even harder than he did. And he didn't even lose that bad.
Yeah. Dean Phillips got to watch his back on that score. He could be our only hope.
Don't go to that Ambassador Hotel, Dean.
Ballroom, and that could be it,